Hello, peeps, it's the Hillbilly Halfwit. How are you all today? Well, I've got a cracking one for you today. This is about the BBC wage bill. Now, when I used to work on a forestry machine years ago, I was in the cab all day long for hours and hours and hours, and I used to listen to the radio all the time. And I used to listen to Radio 4 all the time because I'd gone through all the other channels. And I remember somebody on there saying that the BBC had 70,000 employees. And now they say there's only 20,000. Now, I clearly remember a BBC executive saying this, and worldwide they've got people everywhere, in every country, all over the place. And I'm thinking, you hear this figure of 20,000 spoken on the BBC all the time, employees, that's nothing. They've got lots more than that. So I thought I'd ask ChatGPT. And what do you know? I'm correct. And instead of having 1.7 billion a year wage bill, the wage bill, the license fee payer is nearly 4 billion, not 1.7 billion. So who is hiding all this? So let's carry on. So please comment, rate and subscribe. Listen to the truth about the BBC. Listen to where all that money's going. So here we go. This is a long-form explanation for the video. Introduction. What the public is told. Every year, the BBC publishes its annual report with headline figures designed to show the size of the organisation and the amount spent on staff. The key message presented to the public is simple. The BBC employs around 19,000 people. The BBC spends about 1.7 billion a year on staff costs. To the average licence fee payer, that sounds like a large but understandable public organisation. It sounds like a broadcaster with roughly the same staff footprint as a medium-sized government department. But the crucial point is this. Those numbers only describe a fraction of the people who actually work for the BBC. And unless you read deep into the footnotes of the BBC's accounts, you would have no idea that the true workforce and true labour costs are far larger than the headline figure suggests. What the public is not told. The BBC's 19,000 staff figure includes only employees directly on the BBC payroll, PAYE. However, the BBC's output depends on a far wider global labour force that the public never sees included in these headline totals. The hidden operational workforce includes freelance journalists, self-employed presenters, camera operators and sound engineers on day rates, production teams hired per project, local reporters, fixers, translators abroad, drama and documentary crews employed by external production companies, world service contributors across dozens of countries, BBC Studios production staff who are not counted as BBC payroll. None of these people count as BBC staff in the headline statistics, even though they are paid from BBC budgets that ultimately originate from licence fee payers. They're doctoring it like the civil service. 3. The real workforce size. When you add together the people involved across all these categories, the BBC's real functioning labour force expands from official BBC employees from 19,000 to total operational workforce, roughly 50,000 to 70,000 people worldwide. Let me read that again. The BBC's official employees are 19,000, but the total operational workforce is roughly 50,000 to 70,000 people worldwide. This means more than half of the BBC's real workforce is not mentioned in the headline figures. From a public transparency perspective, this is a very important point. When an organisation relies on tens of thousands of people to create its output, the public would reasonably expect those numbers to be reflected somewhere in public reporting, but they are not. The difference in wage costs. The BBC publishes its staff wage bill at approximately 1.7 billion per year. Again, that figure only covers direct employees. But the BBC also spends enormous sums on labour that is not called staff costs. Most of this spending is buried inside other categories, including independent production commissioning, 1.4 billion, direct freelancer payments, 200 to 250 million, world service local contributors, 100 to 150 million, BBC Studios non-payroll production teams, 250 to 350 million. When you bring these categories together, the real annual labour cost for everyone working for the BBC rises to 3.7 billion to 3.9 billion per year. Let me say that again. The BBC staff cost actual, not what they say it is 3.7 billion to 3.9 billion per year. This is roughly double the staff cost number that the public is led to believe, and represents the full cost of BBC employees. How this presentation misleads the public. To be clear and legally safe, you should not accuse the BBC of lying unless you have evidence of intent. However, it is completely accurate and entirely fair to say this. The way the BBC presents its staffing and cost information gives the public an incomplete and highly selective picture of its true operational size and the total cost to the licence fee payers. Here is why that matters. Most of the workforce is invisible in BBC reporting. Only 19,000 of the 50,000 to 70,000 people working for the BBC are counted as staff. The public therefore sees less than half of the true workforce. B. More than half of the real labour cost is hidden in other budget lines. The BBC headline wage bill is 1.7 billion, but the total labour cost is 3.7 to 3.9 billion. That is a difference of over £2 billion. C. Licence fee payers fund almost all of this. The public is told that the licence fee funds public service broadcasting, but the accounts, when read fully, show that licence fee money also supports tens of thousands of contractors, global contributors, private production companies, commercial production operations that are not present as part of the core staff count. To the average citizen, this creates the impression that the BBC is smaller and cheaper to operate than it is. D. The BBC's communication strategy keeps the narrative simple. Most people will never read a 200-page annual report. Instead, they hear the BBC say we have 19,000 staff. Our staff costs are 1.7 billion. That becomes the accepted truth. But the numbers leave out the majority of the people and the majority of the costs. This is selective presentation as the same effort as underreporting, even if the BBC can technically say the figures are accurate in a narrow sense. The clear evidence-based conclusion here is that as a safe, factual and comprehensive conclusion you can confidently use. The BBC tells the public it employs around 19,000 people and spends 1.7 billion per year on staff. But this only covers direct employees and excludes the far larger group of freelancers, contractors, independent production crews, and overseas contributors who produce most of the BBC content. When these categories are included, the real number of people working for BBC output rises to roughly 50,000 to 70,000 people, and the true annual labour cost is close to £4 billion per year, roughly double the headline figure presented to the public. The result is that the licence fee payer sees only a partial, filtered version of the BBC's real size and cost. So, people who pay in a licence fee are paying £4 billion per year, not £1.7 billion per year. for 50 to 70,000 workers instead of 20,000. They are basically twisting the facts. So there we are. This is from Gaz. And it goes to show, I follow these things. I never forget stuff about politics. And I knew I was right. So please comment, rate, and subscribe and share and hype if you don't mind, to help me get these facts out to you. All the best, Gaz.